here. It's great to be back at the Sears Dome. So I always, this habit now, I like to improvise a little bit in the beginning. It's a little bit strange to think about it, but in a way it's not, because if you were to go back to the times of Liszt and Chopin, that's what they would do. They would improvise all the time. So I think in the past, like last time I asked you to give me random notes and I made something up. Let's do something else today for a change. Shout out some names of classical composers you like, if you wouldn't mind. Any of them? Mozart, anyone else? Bach, Chopin. Okay, well, let's start with Mozart and Chopin. How about I play some silly tune in the style, maybe like Happy Birthday in the style a little bit? What do you think? See what happens. So, Mozart. Happy Birthday in the style of Chopin. Maybe a little more melancholy this time. I'm going to go to the real program now. I'm not saying it's not real, but it's sort of not really the music I was going to focus on tonight. The first piece I'm going to play, tonight is oddly enough going to be mostly short things. Just happens to be. Maybe short and sweet is good sometimes. This is the Sicilian by Maria von Paris. Except there's one problem with that. She didn't write it. It's not by her. It's a musical forgery, which you have the same thing in painting, where there'll be a painting by, say, Rembrandt or someone, and it turns out that Rembrandt didn't do it. And that's what this is. The real person who wrote it is a guy named Samuel Duchamp. But I'll tell you a bit about both. Maria von Paris was a wonderful composer from Vienna in the late 18th century. this piece, and he and Fritz Kreisler and many others would do things like that. They would write something somewhat in an old style, like an 18th century style, somewhat in this case. And they would say it was by someone else. And there's a good reason for that. You know, if I were to sit here and say, okay, I'm going to play you something I wrote, chances are you think, you know, why should I listen to this guy's music when we have Beethoven and Chopin and all these people? But I think that's the logic behind that, maybe. But whoever wrote it, doesn't matter, it's a beautiful piece. And it's the Sicilian roots of that obviously are Sicily. It's a rhythm, it's a dance rhythm, the origin of which is in Sicily. And the rhythm is something like this: bum, 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 long, short, long, short, long. And there's so many pieces that have that rhythm, like speaking of Mozart. Schubert did it too. It's that same rhythm, Sicilian. Here's Rachmaninoff. And even perhaps more popular is that's a Sicilian as well. Kind of odd to hear that in August, isn't it? So the Sicilian, according to Rousseau, he wrote about it. He said that it has a nostalgic feeling, a homesickness. It's a bittersweet musical form. And I think that it's especially so in this version. And I came to love this piece because my hero, this violinist, Steve Gillis, played it in his final years. He lived to be 98 and played violin until the very last years. And this is the piece he played most of all in his later years. And the way he played it was just so, there's recordings of it. So, at first I wanted to switch instruments to violin, and then I realized that my wife talked me out of it, so I'm playing it on the piano. I've kind of arranged it for a solo piano. Here's the Sicilian by Maria poem. I already said it's not. It's by Samuel Dushkin. going to play a couple of Franz Liszt's arrangements of different pieces. Lieder, German lieder, and I don't sing lieders for voice originally, and I don't sing in German. You know, I've tried singing, and this friend of mine who sings told me, look, you know, anybody can sing, you just have to believe in yourself and take deep breaths. And I did that, and I sang a note and 2 notes, and they said, I'm second thought, maybe not anybody can sing. So I don't sing, I do my civic duty, and I refrain from singing. So, but Liszt has done so many arrangements of vocal music for piano solo, and he really makes it idiomatic for the piano. That's what's so amazing about Liszt's arrangements. The first one is Robert Schumann, and I've played a lot of his music here before and spoken about him a lot because he's one of my favorite composers. This is the Widmung, or dedication, by Schumann, and it's the first of a song cycle called Myrten, or Myrtles. And he wrote this as a wedding present for his wife, Clara. Think about it, wedding present for his wife. He wrote an entire song cycle. I played this somewhere, and somebody said, did you write music? Song cycle for your wife as a wedding present? I must confess, no, but it's such a wonderful thing. Their path to getting married was pretty tricky because Clara, you know, she herself was a great pianist and composer. Her father, Friedrich, was Robert Schumann's piano teacher, and he did not approve of them getting married. So it took years, and they had to go through the courts. By the way, Schumann flunked out of law school, and that helped him a little bit. He had some knowledge of law, and they eventually got married. And he writes this piece. And I think that probably the father-in-law saw Robert Schumann as being sort of an unstable person, because at that time, they didn't really understand what it was that he had. Now we know, people speculate that he probably had bipolar disorder, if not something else, but whatever the case, he had a terrible mental illness. And in his music, as with his life, it's nothing just in the middle. You know, it's either one extreme or the other. They used to call bipolar manic depressive. And his music, you could say, is like that. And this piece is kind of manic. You know, I'll tell you a couple stories about how I believe Schumann played and looked at it. I was playing a Schumann piece, I forget which one, for my very Russian piano teacher while we were ago. And let's just pretend it's this piece. And I played it in a very, almost like a lullaby, almost like the last piece, you know, very calm and very, you know, beautiful, but not edgy, you know. I played it like this, like. And of course, after 3 seconds, my teacher said, stop. Terrible. My Russian teacher, he said, it sounds like you are drinking nice cup of coffee, very thorough, reading the newspaper. It's not Schumann. Schumann is on fire. And that stuck with me. Schumann is on fire. Another story, it's about the internet. You know, the internet can be a strange place. I post videos sometimes when I play online, and one of the rules of doing that is to not read the comments. So I read the comments. And somebody wrote, too fast. Okay. Somebody commented on that comment. It's not too fast. Timing is all over the place. Very bad. Okay. I thought about it. Sometimes, you know, critiques can have some truth to them. But I realized I respectfully disagree because, as I was saying, I think Schumann's music can never be too comfortable. And it always needs to be on the edge of something. That's what my teacher brought out for me, telling me what he said. You know, this piece, to me, it sounds like the feeling of being in love. The adrenaline that goes through when you're talking to the person you love. And maybe that your heart skips a beat and butterflies in your stomach. I mean, this is how I think it ought to, you know. So it's all there. That's what I think. This is a love song. It's not really too different from something like Smoke Gets in Your Eyes in more recent times. But anyway, this is Liszt's arrangement of Robert Schumann Widmung, which means dedication. play another Liszt arrangement, and this is of Schubert. Schumann, Schubert, different people that are similar to this. The names, and they could not be more different. This is a bit of an earlier piece. Forgive me for not going in exact chronological order here. This is the Erlkönig by Schubert, and it's a vocal piece again. The text is by Goethe. By the way, the text for the last is Rückkehr. My German's not that good. When I went to Germany, people told me I had great pronunciation of everything else was lousy in German, so that was a backhanded compliment. But this piece is terrifying. It's terrifying to play. For one thing, it has, just technically speaking, it has these repeated notes throughout. I guess I should have drank more coffee today. It helps to play. But in all seriousness, the subject matter of this piece is very dark. It's very terrifying. Schubert wrote this as a young man. He was probably about 17 years old, in 1815. And the story of the piece, you know the lyrics, which you're not going to hear the lyrics. Liszt paints a picture of the story without the words. But in the song, there are four characters. There's the narrator who tells us what's going on. There's a young boy who's very sick. There's his father. And then there's this strange supernatural figure, the Erlkönig. By the way, that word might mean elf king, old Danish, Trinity's king, but even then, it's not clear what the word means. But the Erlkönig character is goes to the source, lives in the woods. And the piece takes place in the middle of the night during a thunderstorm, just like we had. I was thinking about this piece driving here. And the father and son are a horse carriage racing through the woods to get to the doctor because the boy's very sick. And you can hear all of that in the music. The horse hooves, the wind, the trees violently, swaying around and rain and everything. Let me play you some of it. You can hear it. It's all there, right? So the piece is a dialogue, really. The son keeps telling the father in German, my father is I hear and I see this ghost who's telling me to come to him. And of course, the Erlkönig represents death. So he's telling the boy, come to death, come to me. And you hear that in these higher pitched moments, like that's the boy's voice. There's like a panic quality to it. And then the father keeps reassuring the son. He says, mine's on, don't worry. There's nothing, you're imagining things. And maybe the most peculiar part is the Erlkönig's part. Because when the Erlkönig speaks, the music becomes almost completely calm. And it goes into a major key. It's like the sun comes out. And it's like a cheerful feeling to it. It doesn't make sense why this terrifying ghost sounds cheerful. I think of it as being like in a dream state. You can still hear the horse hooves in the left hand, but they're distant. And I think there's a quote from Alfred Brendel, who was a great Schubert interpreter, a Viennese pianist. And he said that in Schubert, when you have music in the minor key, which is most of this piece, that represents a cold and harsh reality. Because for Schubert, reality was cold and harsh. He was unknown during his lifetime. He suffered himself from a debilitating disease and died at the age of 31, penniless. When you have music in the major key, like that Erlkönig's part, according to Brendel, that represents a world of illusions and dreams, daydreaming, even hallucinations. That, to me, is an explanation not only of all of Schubert, but especially this piece. And it's not the case for other composers. You wouldn't say that about Beethoven. Beethoven was very different, very different composer. And you know, a really great singer when they do this, like Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau, can change their voice to sound like all the different characters somehow. Because it's just one person singing, but they have to convey these four different people. So this arrangement, again, he transfers all of this into solo piano. And this was one of the pieces he played most of all in his early years of touring virtuoso pianist. And this was one of the things that made him a star. You've heard of this domain. It's a thundering piece, and it just really struck people. And I think maybe it was even more striking in that time than now, because in that time the music people were more used to was something like, say, Mozart. And if you hear this after Mozart, it's like hearing heavy metal or something after, I don't know, because it's so heavy. And I like to joke around and then keep things light, but there's absolutely nothing light here. This is like a horror movie, which, by the way, was very popular. The genre of horror was very popular in its time. Think about when Frankenstein was written. It's around then, early 19th century. So here is the Earl Canary by Franz Schubert, arranged by Liszt. So good luck to you, good luck to me. very end of the piece, in the song, the vocal part, you might have noticed that it's pretty loud, but at the very end it gets completely quiet, and it ends on the quiet side. The narrator tells us that the boy died on the horse carriage. So it's just, and Schubert, who died at 31, he lived this piece. And the idea of having a dialogue with death all the time, and feeling, so he lived it. And I think this brings it out as a piano piece in a wonderful way. It's terrifying, but a very incredible way. So, now I'm going to play a piece. I'm going to play Ave Maria, but not the Schubert. Last time I played the Schubert Ave Maria arranged by this. And maybe that's the more famous Ave Maria. That's, of course. But I'll tell you a quick story. My wife is also a pianist, and recently she played for a big wedding. And they told her, they asked her, "Would you please play Ave Maria?" And she said, "Which one?" Because there's more than one Ave Maria. There's more than two. And they said, "Look, don't get smart with us. Ave Maria." Well, this is another Ave Maria. This is the Bach-Gounod Ave Maria. And in the 1850s, Charles Gounod was spending some time with his father-in-law. And they were playing Bach together. Think about this. If everybody played Bach with their in-laws, the world would be much better. And they were playing this prelude, the C major prelude from the well-tempered clavier. If you're Glenn Gould, you play it like. There's many ways to play it, but that piece. And I spoke a bit about improvising and how people did it all the time in those days. Gounod started to spontaneously improvise on top of that Bach. The father-in-law was playing Bach. Gounod played this melody and improvised on top of it. And the father-in-law said, "Wow, son-in-law, that's great." I don't know if you called him that. And he jotted it all down. Actually, father-in-law did. What a good father-in-law. I forgot his name, I'm sorry. But really, what a good father-in-law. And so Gounod edited it, touched it up a bit, and published it as a violin piece. And then he revisited it and added lyrics. He added the Ave Maria, the Latin Ave Maria text, the Hail Mary prayer, as the words. And published it again as a vocal piece. And there are even versions that combine the two. You have, like, say, Yasha Heifetz on the violin, or Misha Elman, they recorded this. And they'll play it the first time through on violin and solo with the accompaniment, and then the second time through a duet with a choir or a singer. So it's really, it can be both violin piece and vocal piece. Of course, I don't sing with the violin. So this is an arrangement by Georges Bizet, the guy who wrote Carmen. So, it's a lot of people involved in this Ave Maria. Let's go through it again. There's Bach, because it's based, the Bach is underneath everything. So it's Bach. It's Gounod. It's the father-in-law, the guy's name, sorry. And it's Georges Bizet, who made it into a solo piano version. So here it is. Here's that Ave Maria. Thank you. So, I like to play pieces that are somewhat out of fashion. I think a piece like that, an arrangement like that, is a little bit out of fashion now. This sort of thing was popular more in the 19th century, to play arrangements, to do improvisation, to do all these things, to add lots of curls and things to it. It's like those translations of literature you'll read from the 19th century, or just literature from the 19th century that has flowery language. But I love the flowery language. I love going to antique shops and seeing things that aren't particularly, well, useful, but they're beautiful. And here's a composer that's not played so much anymore. He was played a lot by pianists a couple generations ago, like Vlad Horowitz played this composer. This is Moritz Moskowski. He was Polish and lived most of his life in Berlin. And his music, a lot of the time, it's very light. It's even comic. You know, it's like a souffle or something, meringue. And I think for some reason, a lot of classical music folks today, when they come across a piece that has humor, they automatically assume it's superficial. You know, if it's not downright depressing like Earl King, then it's not really worth time. But I disagree. And I was reading about recently how in ancient Greece, they believed that the comic playwriters like Aristophanes in some cases were more profound than the tragic ones like Euripides. So maybe comedy has a serious point to it. And this is kind of a comic piece. I mean, it's not maybe not going to make you laugh. It's maybe the word's not comedy, but it's more wit. It has wit. And it's called Guitar. It's based on the Spanish flamenco music, loosely based on it. And it's a typical 19th century salon piece. It's a masterful piece, but it's in this genre of salon music. You know, it's so, anyway, I love Mussorgsky, and I love this piece. I hope you do too, because he's one of these composers who needs to be heard more. So, here is the piece, Guitar by Moritz Mussorgsky. another piece that's in this vein of lighter music, and that, by the way, there's a very famous violin arrangement by Sarasate. Maybe that's more famous than the piano version. And I told you I'm obsessed with the violin and playing violin music on the piano. But when I discovered that this was originally a piano piece, I thought, oh, fantastic. And that I won. It's written for the piano originally, so I can play it. Well, the next piece is written for the violin originally. And I've adjusted it to be on the piano. This is the famous Sean Rosenberg by Fritz Kreisler. And Kreisler, unlike maybe Musorgsky was, but pretty much most of the classical composers of the past and present are pretty stern people, not very playful. Even Mozart was. But Kreisler, Fritz Kreisler, if you look at pictures of him, he had this wonderful, it's almost like a handlebar mustache. He's always smiling. And he had this Viennese soul to him. He's as Viennese as Viennese, and he was almost a happy-go-lucky person. And he embodied Vienna. By the way, this is a waltz, just like so much Viennese music isn't. The Viennese waltz is not a regular waltz. A regular waltz is. But the Viennese waltz has a little hiccup in it, Somebody talking, there's just a little, there's a little awkward, you trip up the banana feel, but it has an elegant, it's quirky, but it's elegant. And that was Fritz Kreisler, but he was Jewish. And when the Nazism and fascism started to really take hold in Vienna and Austria in the 20th century, he was rejected by that culture in such a ugly way. He embodied that culture so much, but he was cast out from it. But he was very lucky, he got out. He and his family came to the U.S. and he had a great time here performing. And one of his favorite performance partners was Rachmaninoff. They played together, and they couldn't be more different. I played a lot of Rachmaninoff. I think in the past, Rachmaninoff was a 6.5 foot tall Russian guy with a shaved head and a smile. Looked like an escaped convict since prison. Well, they were performing together in Carnegie Hall, and Fritz Kreisler never practiced because he didn't need to, but he didn't like to. He liked to be with the people. When he gave concerts, he said, I'm going to see my friends. I tell myself that every time I play because it's a good reminder of what the priority should be. People not getting perfect, Kreisler didn't care. He was more of a people person. And he would, when he lived in New York, his favorite thing to do was just sit in Central Park, look at the trees, talk to people, stare at the squirrels. Well, he didn't practice them. So we did a recital with Carnegie Hall, and he messed up. Lost his place in the music. Rachmaninoff's over here, Kreisler's over here. Kreisler walks over to Rachmaninoff and whispers, where are we? And Rachmaninoff, practically humorless, snarled at him, Carnegie Hall. I think that you'll sense what he was like as a person from hearing this piece. Here is Fritz Kreisler, Sean Rosenberg, my own tweak for the piano. I gave a concert at a synagogue and played and talked about composers from a Jewish background. And so Fritz Kreisler was, Samuel Dushkin in the beginning, going to play now, Moskowski also. Now, here's George Gershwin, his parents were Russian Jewish immigrants, and they were involved in the Yiddish theater in Queens and Brooklyn. Gershwin's name, his family name originally was Gershowitz. His given name, his first name was Jacob Yaakov, and he changed his name, as many Jews did at that time, with anti-Semitism and everything. He sort of remade himself to be this all-American, his music. What did he do famously was he incorporated jazz and blues, popular idioms, mostly African-American, genres, into his classical compositions. But here's something that people, I think, don't talk about as much. There's a little bit of klezmer in Gershwin, who begins Rhapsody in Blue. What instrument plays this? That's a clarinet, which is a typical instrument in klezmer music. And this is the third of the three preludes from 1926. I hear so many things. I hear it reminds me of newsreels in the 20s. It reminds me of flappers, the whole roaring 20s thing. But I hear, also Tin Pan Alley and all that. But I hear a lot of klezmer in this. I really hear So here is George Gershwin's Prelude number 3 from the 3 Preludes, 1926. Still and Gershwin lived at the same time, about, pretty much. And people like to compare them, but I really don't like comparing them because they're like, to me it's like apples and oranges, they're so different. They both included popular American musical idioms into their classical writing, but they're so different. Still was from Mississippi. For one thing, that's pretty different from Queens. Very different. If music could have a humidity level, this piece would be very humid. This is Summerland by William Grant Still. He wrote it in the 1930s. And it reminds me also of that Spanish moss that hangs off the trees in the deep south. I was in Jacksonville, Florida, playing a few months ago, and the concert organizer, I was in his car, and I mentioned this. I said, it's so beautiful, this Spanish moss. He said, you like it? I said, yeah. Why don't you take some home with you? Put it in your suitcase. I'm glad I didn't, because I found all kinds of bugs in there. But anyway, that's what this music reminds me of. And William Grant Still, I think, especially saw himself as an opera composer. He wrote many operas. And his opera, Trouble Island, has a libretto by Langston Hughes. It was done at the New York City Opera in the late 40s. And there was a great reception. People were standing ovation, curtain calls, and future performances were mysteriously canceled. And this would happen to him a lot. And it wasn't maybe so mysterious. Still was African American. say that he puts the blues and jazz into his music, that's not really quite it, because he has his own unique style. There's a little hint of those things, but he is a uniquely Southern American classical music style. So here it is, William Grant's Little Summerland. You know, there's not all the great composers come from Europe. There's so many composers from every continent. Well, maybe not in Antarctica, maybe not. But maybe now, who knows? Someone living there is writing music. I mean, one of those science bases. I'm sorry for the tangent. But really, so I'm not going to play Manuel Ponce, the intermezzo #1. Ponce was from Mexico. And he studied in Berlin and tried to become like a European composer. But then he went back to Mexico and changed his mind. He realized he didn't want to sound European. He wanted to incorporate Mexican folk music into his classical writing. And you hear it in this piece, the thirds. Or that's a distinct feature in Mexican folk music. It has a lot. This piece reminds me, well, I went on a trip with my family not so long ago, a week and a half ago, from Mexico. Flew to Cancun. I didn't really like it. Cancun has changed. It's very touristy. We visited Mike, so we rented a car and drove inland 4 hours to Merida, which is a real amazing city. And this piece reminds me of the warmth people have there. And also the warm weather was made this weather look like winter. So anyway, but really the warmth of people there. This piece reminds me that it's a very melancholy piece. Also, finally, it reminds me of my piano teacher, Solomon Bukowski, who's no longer with us. He was from Cuba originally, and he would assign a lot of Cuban composers to us students. Probably he would have liked this piece too. It's not exactly the same, but there's a similarity, of course, geographically close, Mexico, Cuba. And he never liked how I played it. I can imitate him, I do his voice. And he didn't think that my impersonation sounded like him, but it really does. He was wrong about that. Nothing, he wasn't wrong about anything else. You know, he would talk like this in the office for a while. I'm still playing, he was always so tired, And I would play for him this Cuban piece or Latin American composer, and he would tell me, oh, you don't understand. You only speak Spanish. It's ridiculous. So sad. And finally, I practiced very hard. I listened to Cuban folk singers, and I prepared this piece to get all the nuances and phrases, and I played this Cuban composer during this piece. And he was silent. And I said to myself, I got this. And he says, very quietly, I heard him say, why do you even bother? He made all the students play in front of each other like this, like in a big room like this. All the students got together, and he forced everyone to play a different piece by a Cuban composer. And one by one, the students would get up, play the tear shreds. Okay, there was one student who was a Cuban exchange student. And they played, and Solomon Bukowski said, no, it's so much better, but it's still very bad. I don't think he would like how I play this, but you know, he was encouraging. Part of the way he said these things was tongue-in-cheek, I have to say. He had a very dry sense of humor, and he probably wouldn't like how I played this, but whenever I play it, I think of him. So here it is. hot climates. I'm going to play you a piece now that you might experience in reality if you go outside. Flight of the Bumblebee. There are different arrangements, and I play a couple. But tonight I'm going to play you Georgi Chiffer's arrangement. The original piece is, of course, by Rimsky-Korsakov. It's from his opera, The Tale of the Tsar Sultan. And in Act 2, this prince turns into a bumblebee so that he can fly into the royal palace and see the Tsar, who happens to be his father. Don't want to say about why. It's a Russian fairy tale. My mother's from Russia. They don't make any sense, Russian fairy tales. It's just my mother says it. Speaking of Russian, I was on my way here and I was looking for a place to have dinner. And I'm half Russian. I had a Russian teacher for a while out in Moscow. And I see my favorite Russian supermarket on the way, Golden Hex. They didn't pay me to advertise this here. And I went in and I had these incredible, borscht and holodets and all these things. I think I smell like garlic, sorry. But anyway, Schiffer's arrangement. Georgi Schiffer was a Hungarian gypsy pianist who was actually imprisoned by the Soviets in the 50s when he tried to escape. And he was sentenced to hard labor lifting heavy stones, and it damaged his ligaments in his arms, his hands. He would wear these thick leather bracelets to support the ligaments, but it did not get in the way of his playing at all. He was a superhuman the way he played. I give up trying to do this sound like him, but that was Art Tatum and Schiffer are like on another planet. And like I said, there's different arrangements for this Flight of the Bumblebee. There's even a version for trombone. And yeah, if you believe that. So an arrangement is like a story being retold, and there's different ways to tell a story. Maybe you've met two different people who tell the same story. One person sticks to the facts, and then another person doesn't. They embellish. And that's what Schiffer does here. He does not stick to the original story. It does not even sound like the flight of a bumblebee. It sounds like a swarm of yellow jackets and hornets. This piece is one of the craziest things I've ever done. It's truly, truly crazy. It's so crazy. And I can hear my teacher saying to me, I'm not impressed by you playing fast and loud. Anybody can do it. He would say, from Russia. My dad's an immigrant. Also, he considers himself to be an immigrant because he immigrated from Southern Virginia. And so I was raised on a lot of classical and Russian music through my mom and through my dad, gospel and spiritual. So yes, this is a spiritual. Go Down Moses, and I'm going to play it kind of in the style that Louis Armstrong does it, because I love his recording of it. So thank you all very much for coming, and just end with something a little different. So here it is, Go Down Moses, kind of in the style of Louis Armstrong.